neuroscience. I got a medical doctor on board, standing by.
All right. Okay.
Great friend of ours, and especially Jonathan Emord. He's been honored at the Sacred Fire of Liberty. He's doing great work, especially as it comes to those folks that are suffering under psychiatric MD care and all of the drugs that they're throwing their way. And I'll show you some of the images of this latest article that he's written. Dr. Charles Simone is with us now on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Dr. Simone, how are you, my friend?
I'm well. Thank you very much for calling me in.
Oh, well, thank you for your patience in getting on today. It's been crazy behind the scenes, as we mentioned, and I'm looking forward to you stabilizing the whole show, so no pressure. So, Dr. Simone, we have articles linked up. We have, of course, your website linked up. You have an article here called How to Stop Suicide Crisis for Children, Veterans, All. And this is as important an article that has ever been written by a physician, because unfortunately many physicians just buy into the belief system that depression is evidence of an SSRI drug deficiency. You know what I'm saying? It's gotten crazy. And there are good doctors out there, such as yourself, that have recognized the danger and are trying to, raise the warning and help these folks. A lot of our troops with PTSD, etc. And how did you come across the danger and start speaking out about it?
Well, a number of years ago, in 2015, I wrote an article about showing that 90% of all school shooters were on antidepressive agents at the time of shooting or just prior to. So I looked more into it. And the children in our country, almost over 1 million children between ages 5 and 18 go to emergency rooms because of suicide ideation and or suicide attempts. There are 22 veterans every day that commit suicide, so the numbers are huge, vast. We're going to talk today about prescription psychotropic drugs. Suicide ideation is very complex, but we now know that data submitted to the FDA show that antidepressive drugs are not effective at all in children and teenagers, ages 9 to 18, or even adults. And even with the most severe cases of major depression, for which the antidepressants are actually approved, they're not effective at all compared to placebo. But these drugs are now inappropriately prescribed to children off-label and teenagers for conditions that are not approved at all, and largely withheld from the medical community and the public. Antidepressant drugs induce violent behavior. So that's the backdrop of it all. I'd like to talk now about the evidence. There's tremendous evidence for this. I just gave a talk last Saturday to the Philadelphia Medical Society, the governor's roundtable of people who look into this situation, and the Veteran Administration of Pennsylvania. They're all very upset about this information. One, psychiatrists don't want to hear that these drugs don't work because that's all they have to deal with. There's nothing else that they can do except prescribe. The Veterans Administration people would not tell me at all how many of these people who commit suicide are veterans, how many they have been taking the drugs. They won't tell me that. And the governor's office is just scared because of possible lawsuits impending. But the large data, meta-analysis studies involving hundreds of thousands of people, 27,000 people in one study, 40,000 in another. We know that these studies have been shown now to be antidepressant drugs are ineffective totally. The published reports claimed positive results, even though negative trials were left unpublished or were distorted to present positive results. These studies were all small randomized trials, biased selection of the populations, and there was short-term follow-up, less than 8 weeks. So you really can't have any demonstrable, observable facts in a short study.
Dr.
When
Simone,
you looked at the most severe...
Real quick, Dr. Simone,
go ahead.
I learned a lot about this from Peter Breggin. Do you know Dr. Breggin?
I don't.
He's written, I don't know if his book was Prozac Panacea or not, but he is really, as an MD psychiatrist, said exactly what you're saying. That this is an absolute disaster, that people are not only suicide, but they're dying from these drugs, just the direct effects of some of these drugs. So it's one of the most, when we talk about the doctors that would look at natural doctors and call them quacks, I'm thinking if you really look at psychiatry today, and I don't mean talk therapy, I think there's legitimacy to talking about your problems and unburdening yourself, but in terms of drugging every emotion, I think that would more or less fall under the true definition of quackery at this point.
Well, these drugs should be off the market because the studies keep continuing. There's a quote from a doctor in Greece. Let me just read the quote to you.
Sure.
Child and adolescent psychiatry, as an established medical specialization, risks permanent extinction since most of the pharmaceutical armamentarium that they use prescribed for common medical conditions proved ineffective and even harmful. So there's people all around in the industry, medical doctors, saying that the same thing you just mentioned. The study goes on, many studies go on, there's poor design of the studies, and they're always biasing the outcome. They have to. Suicidal thinking was passed off as emotional lability or worsening depression. And this information was buried in the FDA appendices that were available for people to uncover it, but deeply buried in appendices, and the FDA never requested the rest of the studies for that. So we now know that these antidepressant medications really don't work. They don't work at all, and in fact, they cause great harm. In 2004, the FDA issued a black box warning for all antidepressants. Now, this follows what the European Union already mentioned. They already know that this is bad behavior, poor violent behavior, etc. But let me go through the list now, how we know that these drugs really cause violence. There are 31 prescription drugs on this list, and it's important to screenshot that soon.
I'm going to bring that in right now.
They account for 79% of all violence cases, according to the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System. That's a big deal. So the FDA shows that almost 80% of all violence are related to these drugs. And here are those drugs.
Yep, I'm scrolling down to it right now. So everybody watching on the YouTube channel live or later on Brighteon, you can actually see, you're going to hear Dr. Simone go through this list. But I want everybody to visually link to this article, but right now you can witness it on the screen if you're watching live right now. So go ahead, I've got it right up in front for everybody to see.
Chantix is the #1 drug. Now, this is a drug you hear about all the time on network media news, nightly news. They advertise it heavily. It's the #1 drug that causes violence in a class called varenicline. Don't worry about the class names. I want to give you a whole series of household words that you know about. But the classes are important because other manufacturers manufacture with different names of this class of drugs. But Chantix is 18 times cause more trouble than all the other drugs combined, Chantix. So if you're looking for a smoking sensation, don't use Chantix. Second drug that everyone knows, household name, Prozac. It's an example of the fluoxetine class. Again, Prozac is a household name most people know, but there are many other names wrapped around this class of drugs. And the list of these classes are all listed in that screenshot you're going to provide to your people. The #3 drug, Paxil. Again, an antidepressant drug, part of the paroxetine class. So #1, Chantix. #2, Prozac. #3, Paxil. The next 9 are more antidepressant drugs. So the story here is antidepressant drugs not only don't work, but they cause evil things: suicide, ideation, suicide, and violence. The next grouping are 6 sedative hypnotics, followed by attention deficit disorder drugs, hyperactivity drugs. Now, these are household names too: Adderall, Dexedrine. These are all amphetamines. Everyone knows that term, amphetamines. Ritalin, people know that word too. But there are other names associated with the amphetamine class, and they're the ones you have to be aware of as well. Fluvox, usually prescribed for obsessive compulsive disorder. This is another harmful agent. Ambien, how many people use Ambien to go to sleep? Singular, for allergies. People use it all the time for allergies. Seroquel, and of course, oxycodone. These drugs are the major drugs that induce suicidal ideation, induce suicide, and violence. So the antidepressant drugs as a group have the highest risk of violent thoughts, violent actions than any other psychoactive drug. Now there's a gene that we all have called the CYP450 gene. Don't worry about that. But that gene breaks down these drugs. The problem is some people have a mutation of that gene. You won't know that until you get prescribed it. Secondly, that gene has inhibitors. Alcohol, cannabis, Celexa, Lexapro, Prozac, Luvox, Zoloft. These are household mixes all over the country now. Alcohol, lots of people use, of course. So if you're taking these evil drugs, these prescription drugs, psychoactive drugs, and use cannabis and use alcohol, those agents, alcohol, cannabis, and some other mentioned drugs, will cause the prolongation of activity of these drugs, of these agents. So beware, you can't combine alcohol with these drugs, you can't combine cannabis with these drugs, and yet so many people do. So these drugs stay around in the system so much longer.
Dr. Simone,
we'll
we're talking
Jonathan
about this.
He has a great quote.
Yeah, Jonathan has beaten back the FDA world record.